Minister, you're a man of many talents. What a lot of people wouldn't be aware of is, along the west coast, one of them is in Deputy Dillon's own constituency, a place called Canrahar. There are places where the tide, particularly high tides, come in other words, spring tides, or, as they call them in Irish, Éamon Ó Cuív. They come in and the road becomes impassable. And that could go on for 3 days at a time, that at every high tide, morning and evening, or whatever time the high tides come, that the road becomes impassable. I have one in my own constituency in a place called Cúnalinga. It happens very regularly. There are 14 houses that are virtually on an island when this happens. Now, it doesn't happen every day of the year because, as you know, the tide varies. But obviously, with rising sea levels, it's going to happen more and more into the future. Now, the problem with these projects are that, in some cases, in the case of Cúnalinga, there are 14 houses. In the case of the one near Westport, I think there are 3 houses and a business inside. But the reality is, you either do them or you don't do them. And I'd always put the counter-argument. I remember one time building or funding a pier in, again it was in Deputy Dillon's constituency, for a family of 3 generations that were living on an island. Now, I think at the time it cost 160,000, and there was a big headline in the British newspaper about the money that was spent. Now, my counter-argument was, if I was to relocate that family on the mainland and give them land and all the rest, and take them off the island, I'd have no change out of the money that we spent, and I'd have dislocated them. And they're still living there many, many years later. So sometimes you have to do things that the economists will tell you not to do, but human common sense will tell you to do. So basically, I see this as the role of the Department of Rural. I was looking at this, it could be a transport role out of roads money, or the Department of Rural. And there are other places along the coast. Some of them, because it comes every day, are recognised as islands, some of the ones in Clew Bay, but some of them aren't. But I'm seeing all of these coastal communities where there's a problem of access and egress during certain high tides and the roads need raising, that a special fund in the Department of Community, could be done under CLOR or any of these schemes, will be put in place to provide annual funding until this problem would be resolved. It's one of these things, once you have it done, it's done forever. In the greater scheme of national money, it's very, very small. In the cost per house or the cost per individual, it does look big, and I accept that. But my view is we need to do something about these. And anywhere we did them in the past, once they were done, I never heard complaints about it. I don't know if our colleague, the Deputy, is aware of Clynish Island. But as I said, it was a lifeline to that small community. And I don't think anybody ever begrudged what they got. Remember this, I grew up in the city. How much has been spent on a city street in taking away the water, the sewage, the street light, cleaning, sweeping the street and all the rest in 50 or 100 years? What's the costing? Nobody ever sees that as a cost or a big cost per house. But once you do it out in a rural area, for some reason, costs always seem to be big.
Words of wisdom, Deputy Ó Cuív. Minister.
Indeed, Cian Gorda, and I think that's a very prescient point about how perhaps people view, or some people, perhaps not you, view the expenditure of money in urban versus rural Ireland. So look, I want to thank Deputy Ó Cuív for raising the matter, and I'm happy to take this issue on behalf of my colleague, the Minister for Rural and Community Development, though I suppose you did raise an interesting point which, in relation to where does this fall in terms of responsibility. That's not to shirk the broader issue, but it is the view of the Department of Rural and Community Development that it has no remit in relation to funding for public roads, and that this is an operational matter for the local authority, and that each local authority is mandated to determine its own spending priorities with having regard to locally identified needs. But I'm not taking that to shirk from the issue, but more just to provide you with officialdom's response. The CLAR programme, to which the Deputy refers, was originally launched in 2001. It provides funding for small-scale capital projects in rural areas that have experienced significant levels of depopulation. The programme, I believe, was closed in 2010, and it was reopened in 2016. And CLAR, as originally constituted, leveraged existing funding streams across a wide variety of developments, including group water schemes, roads, sports capital projects. The Deputy knows this well, obviously. CLAR was restructured and reopened in 2016. 2016, and the scheme now has an increased focus on collaboration between communities and authorities, and the leveraging aspect with which I referred to has been discontinued. At present, the Department of Rural and Community Development has no plans to refocus the CLAR programme on leveraging funding to open a specific strand for roads. But I do think that aside, the point the Deputy makes is a very real reality for communities in certain parts of the country, including ones that he referenced in his own constituency in Connemara. I'm aware that the Government has established an interdepartmental group on managing coastal change to scope out an approach for the development of a national coordinated strategy to manage the projected impact of coastal change to our coastal communities, our economies, our heritage, our culture and our environment. The interdepartmental group is jointly chaired by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage and the OPW, and it's due to bring forward options and recommendations for Government to consider. Coastal protection and localised flooding issues are matters in the first instance for the local authorities to investigate, but to assist them, the OPW has undertaken a national assessment of coastal erosion, including erosion rates, under the Irish Coastal Protection Strategy Study, and the results of this study have been published on the OPW website. This data now enables the country and its local authorities to develop appropriate plans to try and mitigate against the issues that Deputy Ó Cuív is raising here today. Local authorities can, of course, carry out coastal protection works using their own resources, but they can also put forward proposals to relevant government departments to fund appropriate measures. I understand that intervention or hard defences have the potential to cause problems further along the coast. I remember from my time as a Minister for the OPW that that's always one concern that they have, that if you fix a problem in one part of the coast and it moves along to another part. So what I'm saying to Deputy Ó Cuív is, as we speak, there is an interdepartmental group looking at how do we protect our coastal communities and how do we protect from coastal erosion and how do we, I suppose, address issues that can be related to that, and obviously access is a very big part of that. I'll take back his suggestion to Government in relation to CLAR and how you believe that that has potential. I just wanted to share with you the view of the Department, and I'll also take back, perhaps most appropriately, to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for the OPW in the context of their work on that interdepartmental group, that consideration would be given to the issues the Deputies raised around that access and the challenges that poses for local communities.
Thank you for the answer. In relation to leveraging funding, I'm broken-hearted that the Government don't see the merit in it, because the biggest argument often against thinking in small, isolated pockets of rural Ireland is the cost-benefit analysis. Priorities. You've got a certain amount of money, you're going to put it where the people are, because in the pure logic of it, you'll probably get a better bang for your buck. But by having a leverage fund that was specifically there for areas with low population, because that's what CLAR was founded on, you then could make it affordable for the mainline department to do their part of the funding, but make up the difference and narrow the gap. So I would ask that the Government would reconsider the merits of co-funding, because it certainly delivered the problem. Now, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding, and maybe I didn't put the question rightly. In these cases, it's not coastal erosion. The roads are there and the roads work perfectly when you're not getting a high tide. But the tides can be metres of difference in height between the spring tide, we say March and September, and ordinary tides. And it also is affected hugely by the wind. So in the cases I'm talking about, you have a very serviceable road. Everything is fine. Until on a quiet high tide, the water just rises and rises, and you can't drive across it. So it just gets flooded, rather than having to build big coastal defences. So in one case, there's about a half a mile of a road. It's very flat, there's a wall on the side of it, and what you need to do is just raise the road about 1 metre. It's as simple as that, but I was told that it was going to cost €1 million. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. There's a good business inside, as well as a few houses. In another case, 14 houses, same problem. It's a much shorter piece of road. It's in a hollow and up again. So I will certainly take on board. You've really given me a good lead here today. I'm interested to hear about this interdepartmental group. And maybe they would consider as one of the elements that they would tackle around the coast is this access. Can you imagine living in a house and you get up in the morning and the tide is in and suddenly you can't go to school? It would be great. I just loved it when I was going to school, but nowadays the kids want to get to school and the parents want to get them to school, so they're all very serious about it. It's just not workable and livable. So I'd like to thank the Minister for your words of wisdom, and I listened carefully to your second reply.
Minister.
Look, thanks to Deputy Ó Cuív. I do think the Deputy makes a very important point about the cost-benefit analysis, and this has been a bugbear of mine in my own constituency for a long period of time as well, because there are certain parts of rural communities, and I have some of them in County Wicklow too, where they'll never measure up to a cost-benefit analysis that is based on an urban area. And I do think you pose an interesting challenge to us as a system and as a government as to how we can have more nuanced understandings of cost-benefit, and with a bit of an emphasis on the word benefit sometimes as much as the emphasis on the word cost. Look, just to be really clear, and it should go without saying, but let's say it, I mean, the government absolutely appreciates how important both access and access roads are for people in terms of being able to go about their lives and their livelihood, and the point you made about people trying to get to school and college and work and everywhere else, and indeed for farm families and people in rural areas. There is, and look, I think this is the best vehicle to take it forward. There is a commitment under our Rural Future, our action plan for rural Ireland, that interdepartmental group I referenced, which is officially called the Interdepartmental Group on Managing Coastal Change, will finalise and submit its report to government with options and recommendations this year. And that will manage projected impact of coastal change. And I listened to the point you make about this not being, strictly speaking, coastal erosion, but perhaps it obviously does relate to the activity of the coast. So perhaps we can see if it can find a home in there in terms of exploration. Also, the OPW does obviously have its own minor work schemes and the likes. That's another avenue too, and the colleagues in the department who prepared this note are reminding me of that being a useful funding source for local authorities. But look, I'll undertake, Corla, to bring this back both to the Minister for Rural and Community Affairs with her remit under our Rural Future, and my colleague the Minister for Housing and the Minister for the OPW in terms of the work of the interdepartmental group, and I'll ask that they keep in close contact with Deputy Ó Cuív.
Thank you very much.